Hello, welcome back to Relai Bitcoin Podcast today with Stephan Livera. I can't imagine why didn't we do a podcast so far? We know each other for so long.
I don't know. We just haven't made it happen yet. So
yeah.
it's good we're doing it now.
You were one of the first people educating me about Bitcoin in 2015. I got into Bitcoin. 2017, I started to listen to some podcasts. There were not many, and you already did yours in 2017, right? When did you start your podcast?
I started the podcast in 2018, but I was like talking online and kind of doing some like small YouTube videos and things like that late 2017. So maybe that's what you saw. But the thing is, it all kind of gets a blur, right? Like 1 year in Bitcoin is like, it feels like so many in real life.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then we met up at conferences. You also used to work at Swan, which of course was a very close company, a similar company, a peer, or even an idol that we looked up to from Europe to the US. So it's very similar to Relay. And then you even came to Switzerland lately. How was your trip in Switzerland, or how is it getting back? Like when you reflected on your trip in Switzerland, how did you like it?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. Like I thought it was really cool. We went to Zurich just for a bit of fun, right? Just for a little family holiday, and we caught up. I mean, I have been a couple times in the past. Obviously, I go to Lugano regularly for the Lugano conference, but to visit Zurich and to see some different things and to go on the train and go to different places. Yeah, it was a really, really nice experience. And I think, we were commenting as well that in many parts of the world, it just doesn't feel safe. The infrastructure doesn't seem good. I think that's one thing that Switzerland still has, has some semblance of that. Now, of course, when I talk to some of my Swiss friends, they sort of feel like, even Switzerland is kind of losing some of that. But at the same time, compared to, at least in my travels, there are certain places in the world that just, you get a sense of safety, especially in Switzerland, you get a sense of like efficiency and just like things work and things are on time and that aspect of it. I appreciated that. And we just found, we had a great time overall. Just some things were kind of, I think you'll probably relate to some of this, is like, some things they seem like kind of stickler about the rules, or things like, as an example, even car seats, right? Like in some parts of the world, car seats, there's technically a law for car seats, but maybe they don't really enforce it, or maybe for tourists or in the taxi, they give an exemption, this kind of, but in Zurich, it was sort of like, no, you must have a car seat. It's Zero like a big tolerance. Deal. People get in trouble if they don't have car seats, and if you're traveling with two kids, sometimes it can be in Switzerland it can be a bit challenging.
You park your car in the wrong spot for 5 minutes, like either the police will get you or the civil police, like just the Swiss people walking around and saying like, this is not good. You cannot park your car here. Like Swiss people are like that. They're so fucking detailed. And strict on every rule, and they don't question the rules. Like the rule is the rule, and they feel like even normal Swiss people feel like they have to enforce them. This is kind of
and I guess that can be good in some ways and bad in others, right? I'll give you another example. Like I was just recently in Tokyo for Bitcoin Japan, and some of the Japanese Bitcoin people there were kind of talking about how, for example, Koji Higashi, he's like a well-known Japanese Bitcoin guy, and he was saying, yes, there's a conservative aspect of it, but maybe there's almost too much obedience to the state. And then that's kind of causing them to fall behind in Bitcoin adoption. So ironically, even though obviously Satoshi Nakamoto, it's a Japanese name, there's obviously been a lot of history with Bitcoin in Japan, with Mt. Gox, obviously. But ironically, Bitcoin adoption in Japan is pretty low because maybe there is so much like of that. Now, it's a slightly different thing, but it's like so much, I guess, obedience or adherence to the state and the rules and the structure. And in some ways that's a good thing because of stability, but in other ways, maybe they're closing themselves off to obviously Bitcoin and new innovation around money that, obviously you and I and listeners at Relay, we believe in that.
Yeah, exactly. And it leads to also slowing down a lot of progress and lack of innovation because, of course, the government will almost never, unless you're in El Salvador or now in the US, but mostly governments are against Bitcoin. So they will even also, when they give public interviews and like do their thought leadership, like the politicians will almost never really embrace Bitcoin and talk positive about such innovations, even AI as well. There's a lot of criticism in Switzerland about AI, about Bitcoin. Of course, the president of the Swiss National Bank is criticizing Bitcoin a lot. And then, as you said, like people adhere to this, like the 80-90% of people just live their life. They listen to radio, they watch television, they listen what the politician says and take it for granted, take it for bare value. And then so that's how you stifle innovation as well, from top down. And that happens in a lot of these countries where there's a lot of bureaucracy now, and this is like all these rules, very over-regulated. The governments are bloated up, are very big. That's what I found so refreshing when I went to El Salvador. I know you've been there a few times, right? Like, this is so different because everything's so free. It feels like there's almost no rules, but at the same time, everything feels very safe, and people have a lot of hope and ambitions and are building stuff. That was a very different experience to me, coming from Switzerland, Europe, UK, etc., where everything is just full of rules and everything feels so controlled. How is it in Dubai? You're in Dubai now, right?
Yes, I live in Dubai. So I would say Dubai sees it. So we recently had Bitcoin Mena over in Abu Dhabi, right? So that's just like 1.5 hour drive for me. So I drove over for that, and it was interesting. They had some interesting talks, all kinds of different things. Now, to be fair, it was maybe, I would say the vibe was not as much on the cypherpunk, no KYC sort of side of things. Yeah. It was a little bit more towards the, treasury companies, institutional adoption, and kind of crypto exchanges and, mining, Bitcoin mining and things like this. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, I still think it's fair to say it is a very pro-Bitcoin, and obviously I'm Bitcoin only, I don't really like crypto, but yeah, there's crypto, a lot of pro-crypto sentiment here in the UAE. Mm-hmm. So like the regulators and the state here seem to be in favor of it. Mm-hmm. There are some wealth, like Abu Dhabi, I believe, has 2 sovereign wealth funds that have bought, I think, Bitcoin or iBit maybe. And there's Bitcoin mining going on in the UAE. So there's a lot of these things happening. And I think they are relatively forward-looking, forward-thinking. It's a pro-business country. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I'm not an Emirati, but I'm just, from my experience and looking at the way that the rulers here run things, I think they try to be, obviously they have their faith, the Muslim faith, but they are also pro-business, right? Mm-hmm. And that's like explicit. You'll see that, like it's explicitly pro-business here. And so that's something that sort of bleeds through or comes through. And you'll see even the word from the top comes, things like trying to minimize bureaucracy. Yeah. So they actually try to minimize bureaucracy. And so there'll be ways when people are signing up for, renewing their visas and things like this, they try to speed up these processes. Or even, it comes to as simple as something like when you're passing through the airports that, okay, it's all like smart gates and super efficient, and, they kind of they move things through quickly. Of course, in a Bitcoin specific context or even crypto world, yes, people sort of talk about, okay, sometimes it can take time to get approvals for things from a regulator perspective. I'm not, I just do a podcast, right? So I'm not building a Bitcoin exchange or a crypto exchange here in the UAE, but people who are doing that, they have to go through those, obviously, legal and regulatory processes. I know you recently got MiCA approval in the EU as well, so I know that was a whole ordeal, right? So there's some process around that, but, I'd say generally speaking, it's permissive, but at the same time, I think there's all these things going on around the world, right? So obviously the FATF thing, right? Like FATF, as I understand, they recently, this is maybe a few years ago, they put UAE on a grey list. And what that means is basically like other banks around the world might now be more skeptical or more wary of partnering with UAE banks, which means when they want to do fiat wires in and out, that could be a problem too. So then the UAE, I think, they sort of drove more like AML and KYC into the country to sort of become more compliant and get out of the quote unquote bad books of FATF. Now, of course, I'm a libertarian. I believe in, if I could, I would abolish AML and sanctions laws like this, but obviously I understand this is the world we live in today. Yes. So I'm sort of torn in that sense of, there's the ideal sense of, I don't believe AML laws or FATF or sanctions laws should exist, but there's also an element of this is the world we're in today, and there's a trade-off to that, because even if individual nation states were to just kind of hold the middle finger up to Fat F, that could have other consequences for them too, and for people who are doing business in that country, because now they might not be able to have the same fiat rails in and out that everyone still relies on. Now, of course, we can talk about stable coins and all that, but the reality today is that, there's still a lot of these fiat wires that businesses are reliant on, unless you're like fully pro-crypto, fully cypherpunk. That, most people are still having to traverse both of these worlds. And so that's kind of, it's not going to sound as good on Twitter or on X, because the more kind of like, kind of extremist position tends to get very popular. But it's sort of like, this is, sometimes you got to look at what's actually going to move the needle forward. So
it's always,
that's kind of how I'm torn there. But
absolutely. Oh, it's super interesting, all these points. And I mean, in reality, look, it's so much more complicated. Like, they need to maintain relationships to the US, so they can't just show the middle finger to FATF and say, oh, we're doing our own rules or no rules, because in the end then the oil business and everything else will be, they will get higher tariffs and all that kind of stuff. So it's, in reality, it's so much more complicated. But it's good to feel that, to know that there are governments like that are, in principle, pro-freedom and pro-capitalism, and libertarianism, like lower, less rules, less big government and less control, etc. But of course, they will always need to make compromises with all the other geopolitical powers, right? But the Mena conference was a one that, even though I try to not do too many conferences, but this one gave me a bit of a FOMO kick. So I think at one point I will also go to that one, maybe next year. What was your recap? How did you was it the first time you attended the Mena one?
Well, last year was the first one, so I went there, and then this year they had it again, and I think it's steadily growing. I would say kind of maybe the subjective feel on the conference floor, it felt a little less busy this year than last year, but there were still some interesting developments and things like this, in terms of they had, I think, one of the heads of the UAE Cybersecurity Council, or someone on the Cybersecurity Council, talking about, Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And so, there is progress, and so every now and again, like, I would interact or interface with people who maybe they are involved in like a family office for, a wealthy family here, this kind of thing. And so I'd be talking to them and being like, okay, well, what's your progress been? Like, have you been able to get through to them? And some of them, maybe they're not interested in Bitcoin yet. And like, ironically, they some of them even said, I'll buy some at 200K, or you know what I mean? Like, they kind of, that's kind of, right. Well, that's what you would hear. But so you're hearing things from from someone else. So you don't know exactly. But of course, there are kind of known factual disclosures of, like, sovereign adoption in that sense, because they've bought, at least in the sense of wanting to buy Bitcoin exposure. And so I think every year it's just slowly making more and more progress. And I think the fact that there are some well-known, let's say, crypto entrepreneurs in the UAE, right? Like, of course, say what you will about CZ and Binance, but he's, I think he has been given a citizenship, and they have a Binance office and things like this here, and other crypto companies are around, right? So, I would say on the whole, it was just more development and advancement around things like treasury companies and institutional adoption. But not like one or two big concrete nuggets
well,
that I could share.
In general, I feel like, do you share this sentiment that there's, especially this year, is a lot more focus on this more traditional finance? Wall Street is coming in, institutional investors, Bitcoin treasury companies. I mean, it started with Las Vegas beginning of this year, and then BTC Prague with their corporate day. There was now one day fully dedicated. I was on a panel with Jack Mullers, for example, and others, where it was fully dedicated on targeting institutional investors, traditional finance, and there were a lot of them because also the Bitcoin Treasury hype was in full swing. But then even now also Amsterdam was like this. Well, was taken over by Treasury, which is a
new treasury company.
New treasury company
yeah.
from backed by the Winklevi twins, I think. So heavily Wall Street driven, of course, as well. And now Mena sounds exactly in line with that, right? Of course, also Bitcoin. People need to know that the Bitcoin magazine, the Bitcoin conference.
Yeah, BTC Inc. is the company, but
yes.
They have Bitcoin magazine, Bitcoin conference, and Bitcoin for corporations are kind of like some of their subdivisions, let's say. But all part of the same company, yeah.
And basically it's David Bailey behind all this, right?
Yeah,
and
that's basically David Bailey's baby. You know,
right.
Yeah.
And he's also deep into Bitcoin Treasury and trying to get Wall Street money into Bitcoin, etc. So of course this all drives the sentiment. But do you share this, and do you have like what's your view on that? Of course, I think coming from more the early days.
Yeah,
right?
from the libertarian cypherpunk maxi world. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a cypherpunk, but I'm a libertarian who is, let's say, kind of adjacent or a kind of fellow traveler with the cypherpunks. And yeah, I mean, you're right that there's a bit of a tension there in one sense, but in another sense, it does come down to what is your view, because some people hold this view, maybe like an Andreas Antonopoulos view of like, hey, F the banks and, you know, everyone's going to be their own bank. Whereas I had a different view, right? Like even in the early years for me of my kind of Bitcoin journey, I saw it more like, no, I'm not against Bitcoin banks existing in principle. Now, of course, not your keys, not your coins. I want as many people to self-custody as possible, but I'm not against Bitcoin banking existing in principle. So I'm okay with that, you know, longer term. Of course, there have been risks, obviously Mt. Gox, FTX, Celsius, you name it, Quadriga, CX, whatever, how many failures there have been in this space, right? But nevertheless, institutions are coming, they want certain things. And there are benefits to, even if you're a libertarian or a cypherpunk, you get benefits too, right? Number go up is making you more wealthy than you would otherwise be. Now, I understand in some circles, people like to virtue signal against NGU, number go up. But the truth of it is, Bitcoin success does depend on NGU, and NGU is just a crucial part of this thing. So let's not virtue signal about it. Of course, there's NGU, and yes, there is kind of a freedom go up or a freedom aspect to this. But I think the way to get more freedom is it's going to require this NGU. And so institutions, whether that's, you know, the Vanguards and BlackRocks of the world, whether that is banks and lending, and that's the other big, right? So treasury companies is a super hot thing. And obviously the other big hot thing right now is lending, right? There's so much interest in lending and collateralized products. You know, as you mentioned, even Jack Mallers, I did an interview with him in Lugano, and we were talking about strike lending, and that's been like a big thing for them. Yeah. Like strike lending has just gone, like it only started like earlier this year, and it's already become like a big thing just for them. Yeah. So, and I'm hearing about it from lots of people who are doing lending, right? Whether that's like the Ledden guys who also just got a Tether investment. There's, there's like all these other companies. There's like the Debify guys. There's Unchained Capital. There's, Nexo and whatever. There's a ton of these other people doing this stuff. Yeah, and so I think there's just a massive interest in this, and so I can understand there's a bit of a tension on, from a principled libertarian or cypherpunk angle, but on the other hand, it's also this is the pathway to actually bring more people in. Now, there will be a bunch of people who, they just need an easy pathway in, right? If they've already KYC'd on their stockbroking app for them to buy, whether it's ETFs and treasury companies, that's going to be the pathway in for many of these people. And, so be it. I think that may be kind of the top of the funnel. And then hopefully we can pull some of those people further down the funnel to actually learn about self-custody and all these other more freedom, broader ideas about Austrian economics and free markets and hard money and things like this.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not mutually exclusive, right? The number go up and the whole Wall Street TradFi thing. The other things still exist. So if you don't want to participate in ETFs and in Bitcoin treasury companies and all that kind of stuff, but you just want freedom and you want self-custody with your Bitcoin and you want to pay your coffee in El Zonte at the beach with it, you can, right? So let them do their stuff, right? The worst thing that can happen is, yes, it's probably going to get more volatile, but also the whole liquidity and everything is get more mature. So it probably over the long run, even the price gets more stable, and that, as you said, number goes up. Clearly, it will just make the asset more valuable. So this will also benefit these guys that use it over there.
You reminded as well. I think, to be fair, we've also got to point out we've also seen some really big wins on the medium of exchange front. Right? Think about what Block are doing in the US.
Yes.
They've got enabled up to 4 million merchants who can just easily take Bitcoin, and this is better than what it was done than what it was in like the 2013-14 days, because this is already integrated into their fiat payment rail on the same terminal tablet that they're using. So it's like it's another level. And then also in South Africa, Money Badger, I did an episode with Karel from Money Badger. They've enabled 700,000 locations to take Lightning payments.
Damn.
Right? So we are seeing huge steps forward, whether you're a fan of the SOV side of things or whether you're a fan of the MOE side of things. You know, of course, there's things like BTC Pay, there's improvements there. You know, I think we're just seeing improvements across all of this space in various angles, right? Whether it's like new L2s, whether it's renewed excitement for things like Liquid. You know, I think we're just seeing all of these aspects are growing. And yes, right now it's kind of, you know, as we speak now, price is $86,000 per BTC. Obviously, sentiment is down, right? I checked the fear and greed index. It's like 11, right? So it feels like this is like the level that people are at a cycle low, right? Like historically, this is kind of the level almost that people were at when it was like the FTX bottom of like, you know, late 2022 or kind of the bear market of 2018. Like this is sort of a similar vibe to that, and yet there's all this positive news. So it's just funny that we're seeing kind of the price and the sentiment is kind of, you know, down in the dumps, but at the same time there's all this good news too. So you know, I think it's a matter of time. I think things will turn around, but you know, you got to keep on hodling and keep on stacking.
How come though that the price, and this concerns a lot of people. I know from our clients, we have a lot of customers that really buy into this dip, which is great. So we saw the best month ever in November in company history.
Excellent.
So there was a lot of trading volume, and I think others peers like us as well. People do buy the dip, those who have understood it, right? But still, it also a lot of people sell as well out of fear. And I hear from a lot of people that said they wanted to come in prior to the 125K all-time high. Now would be the time, but they are afraid because, as you said, the fear index is really high. So they are not buying now because they think it goes even lower. So definitely it concerns a lot of people that this discrepancy that you just mentioned of, okay, all these great news, right? Coming from the US, coming from Strategy that is still buying Bitcoin like crazy, but and you know, all these nation states also adopting and big companies adopting Bitcoin, and Elon Musk talking about Bitcoin in a positive way, Jensen Huang talking about Bitcoin, JP Morgan, everyone is coming in, all this money coming in. Larry Fink promotes Bitcoin everywhere, the BlackRock legend, right? But in the end, price goes down. What the fuck is happening, right? People are afraid. What is happening?
Yeah, so, I mean, as I'm sure you've probably seen, there was that famous article by Jordi Vista talking about Bitcoin's IPO moment. So there's an element of that, I think. I think it's somewhat... The last few years were tough for a lot of people in terms of the Biden era. And so in that era, there was a ton of crypto entrepreneurs who were getting their banks shut down. And, you know, it was just a difficult environment for people if they did want to actually... unload some of their Bitcoin, right? And maybe they're not selling all of it, but they're selling chunks of their Bitcoin. And so I think that's been a part of it. Of course, now, yes, people can now borrow against their Bitcoin and do it that way. But maybe for some of these people, to be clear, I'm not one of them, but like if you're kind of, from when I'm, again, talking to someone who knows someone or someone who has clients that are like ultra high net worth, some of these people, they've already achieved like a certain level of wealth. Now for them, it's like they actually do want to, you know, quote unquote, rebalance some out of Bitcoin. Now, of course, to you and I, this is like crazy. Like, I'm all about Bitcoin. I'd love to hold more. I'd love to hodl. But I think just for some of them, they want to balance some of that out into other things. And maybe they've got other goals in life. Of course, we don't live forever unless you're Brian Johnson. But, we don't live forever. And so some of these people are probably thinking, well, maybe they want to buy that thing, they want to send their kid to university or whatever it is, and so I think that's part of it. I also think maybe there's an element of people had built up the wrong expectation. So people had maybe in their minds of like, oh, Bitcoin's going to hit like whatever 400K this year, or Omega. Someone told me about the Omega candle. Shout out to our friend Samson. I love what he's doing on Aqua, by the way, to be clear. But I did disagree with him about his continual $1 million calls. Like, he was making $1 million call in 2024, in 2025, and it's just like, look, man,
will be right eventually.
Eventually, but I think he's going to be correct closer to 2032, 2033, around there. I'm a power law fan, right? But anyway, point is, maybe people had their expectations a bit high, and so then now they've sort of got disillusioned, or maybe they believe in the 4-year cycle, so they think, oh, better sell now before the 80% drawdown or whatever, or a big drawdown, and maybe they're chasing AI and gold or something else. But if anything, now's not the time to do that, right? If anything, AI and gold have already pumped. Yeah. If I held stocks in those, or gold or whatever, now would actually, I don't, but if I did, now would honestly be a good time to balance out of those into Bitcoin, right? Yeah. Like, this would be, if it's like buy low, sell high. Like, if you're just in a trader mindset, it's buy low, sell high, and these things have just pumped, so you should be rebalancing out of those into Bitcoin.
True.
Would be how, if you're going to truly try to be counter-cyclical, or at least contrarian in your thinking and approach as an investor, that's what you should be thinking. Yeah. So obviously people should be stacking Bitcoin now, and of course, I think it's just a narrative thing. It'll turn in time, because I think, of course, I think AI is here to stay, but like, be honest, do you really think Nvidia is going to hit a 10x in 8 years? Probably not, right? Whereas I believe, Bitcoin is going to hit more than a 10x in 8 years' time, and so. Yeah, that's why I want to hold Bitcoin, obviously. 100%. So, I think it's maybe I'd summarize it as the IPO moment thing, like OG, multi-cycle OGs kind of selling a bit, people being a bit disillusioned, and maybe because people were holding for so long through the Biden era, now they're feeling like, oh, they can take some out now at like released, at 100K or now at 86K. Maybe they feel like, all right, oh, actually, no one else. What else is, it could also be that the dollar amount now is just significant for people, right? Whereas maybe in the past, they went through 80% drawdowns, but it wasn't that much in absolute terms. But nowadays, it's like when the price drops this much, it's millions of dollars for some of these hodlers, or tens of millions of dollars for some of these hodlers. It hurts now. And so they're like, maybe it is time to just take a little bit out and just, have that from their perspective. I guess we're trying to put ourselves into their heads. Like, what are they thinking? Why are they thinking that? That's my guess.
I totally subscribe to that IPO model, and I think there's IPO narrative. It clearly also shows in the on-chain numbers that you see. I think this year we saw hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. I think like something I read was 400,000 Bitcoin in Q2 or Q3 was it? That were sold by OGs, so meaning by addresses that held them for more than 10 years or more. So these are real OGs that they have amassed tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, and then they sold them pretty quickly though. So yes, there's certainly this IPO moment that now that there's this whole institutional liquidity and the regulatory clarity and the ETFs and everything, now they can, and there's 50 billion in trading volume a day, so they can actually now offload 1 billion, 2 billion without really moving the market. So of course they would do some of that, but also what strikes me is they do it in a very coordinated way, very timely, like all at the same time.
Right, if it's like timed on the weekend in a low liquidity moment, this kind of thing.
That I don't even know, but like, just why would all of these big whales come together and sell in one quarter such big amounts? And since some of them sell the whole lot, like one guy sold like 15K in 1 week, 15K of Bitcoin in 1 week, and that was all he had, or at least all he had on this address or this wallet. Anyway, what makes me think, and also what many people ask me is like, do you think the market is manipulated, or they even assume, oh, Bitcoin is anyway hyper manipulated by the whales, by the Wall Street, etc.? What's your stance on that?
I think it's it's just maturing over time. So maybe in the earlier years, people could more easily play these games of like trying to sell a lot to sort of buy more at the bottom or this kind of thing, or to try to trigger, like, as people know in like crypto world, they've got like auto deleveraging and like cascading leverages that sometimes happen. And so, maybe historically there were these whales who could like try to really move the market by like doing, trying to hit certain stops, or even more perverse, if some of the exchanges, the rumor was that some of these big exchanges like had the knowledge of what their customers are doing and were trading against them. So maybe historically there was elements of that, but I think nowadays, like, it's just growing to a certain size and scale that I don't see that as being that easy to do now, because there are so many people. Because think about how many different exchanges there are around the world, and nowadays there's all these arbitrage people, doing arbitrage trading across these exchanges. I just don't think it's that feasible for for someone to try to do this in like a coordinated way, because someone else could have an incentive to sort of go against them and try to like maybe buy those coins cheaply or whatever. So to me, I don't think it's that likely. I think it's just, sometimes it's a simple explanation is just, look, there's a bunch of older people who want to sell some out. I just view it as, look, it's passing of the baton, right? Like, it's the people are running the race, and there's a bunch of older hodlers who've, they've hit a certain number, they've hit a certain level. Now they want to pass it on, and let somebody else hold the coins. And I think that, to be fair, there's also like some confusion around, not saying from you, but I mean kind of in the way it's spoken about online, is people will assume OGs means the same thing as long-term holders. When LTH, long-term holders, means people, I think it's like 155 days, right? There's like a statistical reason for that. I think Checkmate from Australia has spoken a bit about that. But I think sometimes people conflate those two, because there are some like whales and OGs who are like trading, right? Like, they're not just kind of multi-cycle OGs who only hodl. Some of these are like multi-cycle OGs who are actually like trying to time the tops and bottoms. They're trying to sell a bit at the top and rebuy at the bottom, and things like this. So it gets a bit more complicated, because maybe some of them are actually selling some of the top because they want to rebuy the bottom in their view. So it could be that. I've even heard, there are some whales who they almost see it like their not duty, but they're trying to sort of help Bitcoin for adoption, and they're trying to sort of help stabilize the price in a loose speaking way. So I've heard about that kind of thing also. So, where does it all blend out? I just simplify it to just, look, it's just passing the baton. People passing the baton. There's a new round of hodlers and DCA, stackers who are coming in to, accumulate.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And why it's called the IPO moment is because that's exactly what we saw with like big tech companies emerging out of the dot-com bubble, right? The early 2000s. And then they went public at like some crazy valuation, 2, 3 billion, 5 billion, 10 billion. And then, of course, the early investors, it's not that they didn't believe anymore in Google or Facebook or Amazon, but they already did their 1000x or something. So of course they took some chips off the table and diversified in other assets, other investments, or just in a great life or whatever. So that's why you see with these companies, whenever they went public, they rose a bit, but then they plateaued or crashed a bit to a certain plateau and stayed there for 2-3 years, until this whole giving the baton to the next investor unfolded, right? Until all these guys that did 100x, 1000x, they distributed their shares to a new set of investors, which was more institutional driven. And then all of a sudden, after 2-3 years, the stocks went back to 10x, 100x growth sometimes. If you look at what Google did in the last 20 years since they IPO'd, right? It's fucking crazy. And all of the early OGs investors, they are not, most of them are not there anymore. And so that's kind of the pattern we might see with Bitcoin now for, could be 2-3 years, right? Where we oscillate around 100K, where all the OGs distribute their coins, and then we'll see another race to 1 million maybe by 2030 or something. So that could actually match this IPO pattern. That's a really good point you're raising. I was also aware of that article. Kind of made sense to me, right? So that's the last question.
I think it's that. So go on. Yep.
Yeah, no, please, if you have another comment.
I didn't have anything particular to add there. So Yeah, I just think the baton passing idea makes sense. And look, I don't even think, I guess I would say, I don't even think it might be a 2-year bear market. You know what I mean? Like, I think I could be wrong, right? But my kind of hunch, my kind of, finger in the air, my feeling is like maybe only a 20% chance we're in a bear cycle, and more like an 80% chance we're just kind of in a intra-cycle dip, let's say. I think 4-year cycles are over, by the way. I think maybe they were like a figment of our imagination, and maybe it was always just macro, like it was always just liquidity and macro stuff happening that coincided with the 4-year cycle. And this time around, the macro and all this stuff, like if we talk about macro stuff, quantitative tightening just recently ended. They've just recently had a rate cut, and they've just recently announced, I believe, $40 billion per month of purchases. Now, they're not framing this as QE. They're framing it as, it's for technical reasons, but nevertheless, they've started doing this. It's a small amount, and they could easily raise it in the future, right? And of course, Trump is out there saying he wants rates lower. Trump is very likely to get what he wants. Yeah, he wants it lower than 1%, right? And Trump is probably going to get what he wants, right? Because midterms are coming up next year. So I'm bullish, right? I think, maybe we need, a few more weeks, maybe a few more months of this kind of hanging around in this level. Maybe we go a little bit lower, whatever, but I don't think we're going like way lower. And then I think we're going back up again. And my guess is we're going to be all-time highs again, maybe even probably even first half of next year is my guess.
Wow. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. This whole QE and like money printing is going to be crazy. Also, if he achieves, and I think he will achieve, the replacement of Jerome Powell with his guy, like he will put his guy who is very pro Bitcoin and very pro economy, and I mean, of course, very pro Trump. He's just gonna do what Trump wants. If you put, I don't even know the name of the guy, but if he,
I think it's Hassett, and there's another guy called Wash. I believe Hassett is seen as a bit more dovish, and I believe Wash, I don't know the detail, but I believe he has previously invested in like crypto startups himself. So I think either scenario is probably going to end up good for us as Bitcoiners. But yeah, who knows exactly how it goes.
And for him, like whatever is good for Trump is good for Bitcoin, because Trump is one of the biggest indirect Bitcoin holders in the US, like through his son's ABC company, Eric Trump. They raised like 4 billion, or they have one of the biggest, I think it's 4 or 5 billion, one of the biggest Bitcoin balance sheets in publicly traded markets in the world. So of course he's going to do everything to pump Bitcoin, and it's not only because of that, it's also because of the fundamentals, as we all discussed. But yeah, I'm also very bullish, and thanks for sharing this sentiment and all these information. Last question I wanted to ask, because you were also in this whole Bitcoin Treasury company, you also talked about that and discussed that, and I'm not sure how much you were involved in some of these companies, but what's your estimate of this whole situation now? I mean, obviously we had a huge pump. Now we are really, like, it feels like an overcorrection. What's going to happen is are there a lot of the companies that will fade out? Well, some of the big ones, will they remain? Like Strategy, for example, they keep just pumping billions.
Yeah, the last 2 weeks they've raised like $1 billion each week for the last 2 weeks to buy like 10,000 coins each time.
It's insane.
It's crazy, right? Yeah. My sense of this is, yes, it's in a lull right now. The treasury companies are all of them are down from the high in terms of the common equity. But I think the progress here is not just going to be in a steady straight line. It's going to be lumpy. And so, yes, Strategy's high was maybe like $543, something in that range, right? Don't quote me. It's in that range. But maybe it hadn't justified that valuation at that time. Whereas now they have like, I don't know, last I checked, like 660,000 or 670,000 Bitcoins in their, balance sheet.
Yeah, much more than when they were at 500 per stock.
Yeah, exactly. They've got a lot more coin.
They have like 100,000 more Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and their stock is below 200.
Exactly. Their stock last I checked is like $163 or something like this. So it's like, if anything, it feels like now is a good entry point for some of these treasury companies. Yeah. If you're bullish on Bitcoin and on the treasury company thesis. Mm-hmm. And so I believe in that thesis. I believe it's going to turn around. Now MNAVs is probably the big thing, right? I think people were overpaying on the MNAVs, like in that recent hype. Let's say in the middle of this year, let's say around June, around that time or whatever. So people were probably overpaying on the MNAVs, whereas now, if anything, a lot of these companies are at a better price. Now, yes, there are some examples where maybe things didn't work out well. So, for example, Sequans, I think they were too levered, so they had to sell some, it looks like. Nakamoto, obviously, it was they went to, I think they pumped to like $30 or $31 or something like this. And then, last I checked, their price is like under 50 cents per share.
What?
But interestingly, they do have an option to purchase BTC Inc. And BTC Inc. made an EBITDA profit of something like $22 or $23 million. Right? So we'll see what exactly happens there. Like, will they be able to turn it around? I don't know about whether they're going to come back to new all-time highs anytime soon, but at least off of this low, maybe. I don't know. Now, to be clear, I do not hold any Nakamoto stock. But I think the thesis is people are slowly starting to read and understand more about these things. Of course, yes, there's a lot of argument and debate about these treasury companies. But I think, for me, I believe you can justify some small premium to 1x MNAV on these treasury companies. The debate is how much premium, right? Like maybe if it's really well managed, maybe it can justify like a 2x or like a 1.5x. And maybe if it's not so well managed, it goes at a discount to 1x. Of course, there are risks, right? That there's corporate risk. Maybe the state seizes the coins. These are the aspects of it. But nevertheless, if you think having access to the fiat printers and access to fiat markets that other vehicles and entities do not have is valuable, if you think that's valuable, well then, maybe it can justify some premium. So I think the market is still learning, and we've got these preferreds out as well. So the treasury companies have these preferreds out, and more and more people are starting to learn about that too. Because again, that's like a new way for new people to get some exposure to Bitcoin, or even for existing Bitcoiners who maybe they've got a cash position. Maybe they would rather hold like one of these, something like Strategies Stretch, or Strives have one called SATA, right? And they're paying out, I think, like 10, 11, or even 12%, something in that range, in fiat terms, right? So if you just have a small portion of your fiat that you want to hold with that could make sense for people. So I think it's just a matter of time and learning, education about these things, because it's new. All this stuff is like it's not been around for that long. No, so it's just taking time for people to learn and figure that out. And so I think, if Bitcoin comes back to a proper bull, we start going up again, I think MNAVs on these treasury companies will come back up again, and then they'll start doing the same thing. They'll start doing, equity ATM and debt, and some of them will come out with preferreds. Metaplanet have said they're going to come out with a preferred. So I'm broadly bullish, but I think it does matter your entry price, and you have to sort of understand a lot of these different aspects of it, because it's not just Bitcoin, it's understanding the finance components of it. So broadly bullish, but right now obviously everything's in a lull.
100%. I agree to that, and you really have this rational, calm, and long-term view, as you would expect from Bitcoiner, also on this very new thing as Bitcoin treasury company. So of course always kind of everyone takes as much risk as they want, but it's really good to not fall into the hype or FOMO or emotional trap of these things going up or down. It's very new. It's a new innovation. In this case, it's a financial engineering innovation based on Bitcoin. So let's not rush into things. Let's look at it from fundamentals, first principles. And I really like this thinking, and I agree to that.
One other point I just quickly mention, I would just say, just for people to be clear, I'm an investor and advisor in Orange, which is a Brazilian Bitcoin treasury company, the biggest in Brazil, biggest in LATAM actually, got about 3,700 coins. And I hold some MSTR shares also, just so people are aware, right? At least I'm disclosing what I have. And I think for most people, to be clear, just buying and holding Bitcoin and self-custody is totally fine. Like, that's totally cool. That's probably what most people should do. The treasury company thing, I see that as like, if you want to dabble in a smaller component of your, let's say, your Bitcoin aspect of your portfolio. At least that's how I'm seeing it. And so, just to be clear, like, if you can buy Bitcoin, you should be buying and self-custodying Bitcoin first and foremost. And so, just keep that aspect of it in mind, I would say.
That makes total sense, because that's the lowest risk, highest reward thing you can do in the whole investment and savings market, right? And then if you want to take high risks for potentially also high returns, but also potentially you lose money, then you can dabble into that. Very well said. Thank you, Stephan. Last question, also you're not getting away without that one, is how much of your total wealth do you hold in Bitcoin in percentage, like percentage-wise?
I've got to think this through. It's like, it's got to be over 90%. Yeah, I think I'm over 90%. Yeah. And even that, like, to be clear, it's like some of that is like, if I'm excluding like Bitcoin Treasury equity stuff, right? So if you just count like
the rest of
like
Bitcoin Treasury and
so, and like obviously a small, I mean, I keep a small fiat buffer relative to my net worth. Yeah. So yeah, basically I keep a small fiat buffer. Obviously most of it is in Bitcoin in multi-sig cold storage. And then, some Bitcoin Treasury equity and also some Bitcoin company equity, right? Like, so I'm an investor in Bring In, I'm an investor in some other, different Bitcoin companies, things like this. So, I mean, over 90%. And then if you're counting like Bitcoin related equities, then I'm like, very close to all in basically. So I just see it as like, this is the future. The world is going to catch up to us. And so, I'm a believer.
That's amazing and very inspiring. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Stephan. Very good to be connected to you and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Julian. See you around.
Bye.
Hey, this is Joel again from the Relai team. First of all, thanks for listening or watching to the podcast. We really appreciate your help here. If you want to actually help us out further, you can leave us a 5-star review in the Apple Podcasting Store, in Spotify, on YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, because this way we'll actually reach more people with this fantastic content. And I'll see you in the next one.